You want to be a good neighbor, and you're pretty sure that means loving your neighbor. But how? The first step to loving your neighbor is to know your neighbor. A quick demographic search yields graphs and charts and data that quickly become overwhelming. But behind every statistic, every bar graph, every number, there are very real people whose lives are full of needs, longings, and dreams. This 4-week series will explore how we can live out our values of being curious, creative, and compassionate when we ask, who is my neighbor?
So Gretchen, when I see you joining for a message, it makes perfect sense to me. But not everybody who's watching this knows who you are or knows why you would be giving a message. Can you introduce yourself and tell a little bit about how you're involved at Sycamore Creek?
Yeah, so as you said, I'm Gretchen. I live in Potterville. We actually moved to Potterville about a year ago. I have 2 kids. Hope is almost 10 in a couple months, and CJ is 7.5. And I actually was on staff at Sycamore Creek for almost 10 years, but I've been around for a long time. And while I was on staff, one of my responsibilities was that I was part of the teaching team.
Very cool. So this is something you're familiar with, and you've done this before. So, and so you know that I've been here for 2 years, and before this I was in Chicago, and before that I was in North Carolina. And one of the things that I noticed when I was in North Carolina is we were at kind of a large church, and there was lots of programming. But I began to notice that a lot of the programming was geared specifically for married couples or young families or families in general. And I had a lot of friends at the time who were out of college by a couple of years, but weren't married, didn't have kids, and just didn't have a place to connect. And so Nathan, my husband, and I, we looked around and we're like, let's do something about this.
Yeah.
Let's create a space. And so we started a weekly potluck that we called Open Table. And those folks just became our found family. They were in our house all the time. They asked for advice and we asked them for advice, and they babysat our kids, and they were like aunts and uncles, they were our found family.
Yeah.
Have you ever had an experience like that of finding family?
Definitely. So when I first started coming to Sycamore Creek, I wasn't really feeling like I was connecting. So I talked to Pastor Mark from Potterville, used to be a volunteer, and at the time he was the leader of the small groups team. So of course he said, you should join a small group.
Of course he did.
And I wasn't into that. I didn't want to do that. But eventually I took his advice and I joined a small group, and I started to connect. And then I started to lead small groups, and I led a small group with my friend Star that was for moms.
Mm-hmm.
And that group of women have become like family to me. We are always hanging out. Our kids are friends with each other. Like you said, we babysit each other's kids. Yeah. We cook meals for each other when we're struggling or when we're ill. We even have a running Facebook Messenger where we say, hey, my kid is sick. Can you pray for my kid? Or we have this event going on. We want you to come and join us. So it's our way of staying in touch with each other. They're definitely my family, even though they're friends.
Yeah, I love that. I love your Facebook posts always have the hashtag when friends become family.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, you can see that your love for each other in all those posts.
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things we do here at Sycamore Creek is that we'll pause throughout the message to give people a chance to respond and think about something. So our first chat question is, where have you found family? Take a minute and talk about it. So we're in week 2 of our series, Who is My Neighbor? And we're taking demographics and sort of dry, boring information, but then trying to connect it to the people who actually live in our communities.
Right.
So that we can think about how to love them well. So last week we started the series with sort of an overview at each of our campuses. And this week we're talking about a specific demographic group, the singles and starters. We'll look at another demographic group next week. And then at the end of this series, it will be sort of taking one group from each campus and looking at them all at the same time.
All right. So usually we are curious, creative, and compassionate, but today we're going to be curious, compassionate, and creative.
A little spin on things. And here's what we usually mean. When we say curious, we're saying that your questions are welcome at Sycamore Creek. You don't have to check your brain at the door. You don't have to stop thinking critically when you become part of this family. And yeah, we seek ways forward and answers together.
We practice being curious in a few ways. So we are curious about what the Bible says about a topic or issue. We're curious about what other people say about that topic or issue, specifically what people say that maybe don't agree with us.
Yeah.
And we're curious through prayer. So today, the way that we're going to be curious is we're going to be curious about who our neighbors are and who God has called us to reach.
And we're also going to be compassionate today. And usually when we say we want to be compassionate, we're kind of talking broadly that like everyone is welcome. We want to meet people where they are, no matter what stage of life they're in, no matter what kind of baggage they're carrying. We seek unity in essentials, liberty in non-essentials, and compassion in all things.
So we practice being compassionate in a few ways at Sycamore Creek. We are fiercely focused on the guest. Mm-hmm. We want to develop diverse friendships, and we're also compassionate through service and through compassionate justice. Mm-hmm. So today, when we say we're compassionate, we mean be compassionate to learn our neighbor's needs.
Yeah, it makes me think about that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We talked about this a little bit last week, but just to like reiterate it, we've got more needs than just food and clothes. Food and clothes are kind of on that bottom of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And churches tend to be really good at meeting those needs and thinking about those as needs, but we all have more needs than that. We have needs for connection, for purpose, for like self-actualization. And so we want to be creative in ways that help meet whatever needs people actually have, whether they're the needs for food and shelter, or if it's needs like connection. And so we don't want to stay stuck in old ruts. We don't want to stay stuck in the former ways of doing things. We want to evaluate and experiment and do all that with excellence.
So we practice being creative in several ways here at Sycamore Creek. We are creative through ministry and mission. We are creative in our outreach, and we're creative in the ways that we use our buildings and spaces. Mm-hmm. So today, when we say we want to be creative, we mean being creative in how we meet our neighbors' needs. We want to be creative in how we invite them into the mission of Sycamore Creek.
Yeah. So today we're using demographic information that we found from Mission Insight, which was interpreted by Tom Bandy. So he broke the information down into groups and subgroups. And today we're focusing on one specific group, which is the singles and starters. And this is a group that all three of our campuses focus on. There's a good number of singles and starters around each of our campuses. So within a 10-minute drive of South Lansing, 22.7% of the population is in this group of singles and starters. Within a 10-minute drive of Eastwood is 31.4%. And within a 10-minute drive of Potterville, it's 6.7%, which I'd say the highest group there was 10.5%, which is the potlucks and the great outdoors, which is a subgroup. But like it's a lot. A heavy concentration around each of our campuses is this group of singles and starters.
Yeah, and that's really exciting to me because I'm a part of that group. So singles and starters is kind of an umbrella that is made up of subgroups. Mm-hmm. And singles and starters are young singles who are just starting out, or starter families who are living a city lifestyle.
Yeah. Many singles and starters are skeptical of religion, but open to personal spirituality. So this is the group that says, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. Or if I have a relationship with Jesus, what do I really need the church for? Singles and starters, they might be ambitious, digitally savvy, very involved in social media. Gretchen, where do you resonate with this or see this in your friend groups?
Yeah, I have a lot of friends that I knew in high school and college, and even after. I was involved in theater in the area, and a lot of those people would have conversations about spiritual things, but they weren't really interested in organized religion. I have a lot of friends who want to comment on things that are happening in the world on social media. Um, a lot of my friends are much more digitally savvy than I am. And so I really, in that description of singles and starters, see people that are my age that fit in really well with that.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a couple of key verses that are sort of guiding our series. Our first one is Jesus speaking in the Gospel of Mark, telling us that we should love the Lord with all our heart, our soul, our mind, our strength. And then he says the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the two big ones, love God and love people. And so it's really important that we learn how to love our neighbors well. And then the second key verse is from Jeremiah, where the prophet Jeremiah is encouraging folks to work for the peace and prosperity of the city. So like look for the good of the people around you, and that's going to be a good thing. And so that's what we're trying to do. And then Paul, speaking in Acts in the New Testament, is reflecting on King David after he had served the purpose of God in his own generation. He died and was laid beside his ancestors. So we're looking to like be in our generation, serving the people around us and loving them well.
Yeah, so in this series, we have one key assumption, and that is that we can't reach everyone.
Yeah.
You know, to try to reach everyone is to reach no one. And that doesn't mean that we don't want everyone to feel welcome here, that we don't want people to come here. It just means that when we're making decisions, we are prioritizing a certain group and what their needs and interests and wants might be. Just like I can't be everything to everyone, we as a church can't be everything to everyone. So we're going to stop for a chat question again here. And that, if you want to put that in the chat, if you're watching online, or talk to the person next to you, that question is, what comes to mind when you're thinking about this idea that you can't reach everyone?
So today we're talking about Mosaic Group O, which is the singles and starters, but we're going to choose one specific subgroup because it's in the subgroups that like you get a lot of meaty information.
Right.
And so that's going to be O50, which is full steam ahead. So these are younger and middle-aged singles that tend to gravitate towards cities. They're looking for heroes of the faith and wrestling with feelings of maybe guilt and anxiety and about abuse and shame. This group of people are not particularly religious, but they are spiritual, like what we talked about. And so because of that, they might approach spirituality through things like art and creativity. And they can be influenced by the opinions of sports and entertainment stars.
So it's not about those people necessarily influencing our beliefs, but it's more like we are interested in weighing in on what they do or say. Mm-hmm. For example, when Colin Kaepernick kneeled during the national anthem, that was huge. People talked about that on
Everyone had to have
Facebook.
An opinion.
Yes, tweeted about it. Or when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at the awards ceremony, that was a huge one that everybody commented and weighed in on. And most recently, Travis Kelce and Harrison Butker, who both play for the Kansas City Chiefs, gave commencement speeches that were quite different. And lots of people had things and opinions to say about those speeches.
Yeah, I do have opinions about that one, but I'll save them for now. This group of full steam ahead, they tend to be upwardly mobile and transient. Churches don't necessarily feel relevant to these self-reliant folks. Like if they're used to thinking about churches that meet the needs of food and shelter, then churches aren't relevant to them. So if they wind up at a church it tends to be because they're connected to the leadership of the church, not necessarily because they sought out like a particular denomination.
Right. So they wouldn't join Sycamore Creek because we're UMC, not just because we're Methodist,
Right.
but rather because they connected with the leadership of the church. No pressure.
No pressure. And singles and starters tend to connect best with a church that doesn't deal in absolutes. Like we talked about how we're curious. You don't have to check your brain at the door. So there's some wiggle room, some room for us to engage and think differently about things and use shades of gray rather than binary thinking. They tend to connect with a church that's involved in aggressive social action and advocacy for human rights with a clear mission, both in person and online. A kind of church that's open to experimentation and change.
Yeah. So the church has these traditions that some of us may know, but here at Sycamore Creek, we like to riff on those traditions. Mm-hmm. For example, Maundy Thursday, which is the Thursday before Easter, usually is a day of remembering Jesus washing the disciples' feet. So instead, we practiced washing cars on that day,
right,
or helping people to do their laundry, or doing a service project. For Ash Wednesday, which is the first day of Lent, which is the time that leads up to Easter, we have done a gas giveaway where we've given away $5 to $10 of free gas to people who come to the gas station next door. Or we have done a humbling and healing service. For Good Friday, we one time had like a poetry slam or a poetry read where people riffed on the final words of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so people wrote spoken word pieces and poetry about those final words of Jesus. We are involved in CORE, which is congregations organizing for racial reconciliation. Our congregations are very passionate about working against racism in our country. We are important things in our lives are in the life of Sycamore Creek is activism and even like recycling or composting. We try to get involved in those kinds of things.
Yeah, there's so many different ways that we're involved. So this group, the singles and starters, they might gravitate toward leaders who combine a vision for social transformation with also personal mentorship. So that's like you're doing the big thing, having the big purpose, but not getting impersonal. Like the individual person is still really important in this sort of community. And then like formal institutions, like the United Methodist Church or like being ordained within the United Methodist Church, that might be considered sort of a liability. Like this person has sold out rather than a benefit.
Yeah. So the reality is we are a Methodist church.
Can't get away from that.
When we meet new people, that's not like what we lead off with. It's not like, hey, come to my Methodist church, but rather we want to connect to people through what we're doing and through who we are as a church. We also have a teaching team here at Sycamore Creek, and that's a recognition that, yes, we have pastors who are trained and who are very skilled at speaking, but there are other people in our congregation who have those skills as well, who also have things to say that God has pressed upon their hearts.
Yeah. Singles and starters tend to be drawn toward leaders who have a keen sense of justice that motivates them to take personal risks. And we see this at Sycamore Creek in like our creativity, our willingness to speak difficult truth, like all of those kinds of things. Singles and starters tend to be drawn toward leaders who are organized around those big goals rather than systemic theology. So this is like our series that we have for our messages. Well, those are sort of based around or organized around our objectives and our key results, rather than being like, okay, we're going to go through this book of the Bible, we're going to go line by line, verse by verse. And then the leaders that singles and starters are drawn to tend to be sort of focused on human rights and reconciliation, care for the planet. They're more concerned with how many people they influence rather than how many members they recruit.
Yeah, singles and starters have some preferences that have shaped the way we do things here as well. For example, singles and starters tend to prefer to have multiple choices and takeout. So here on Sunday mornings, we have lots of different kinds of coffee, and we even have cups that you can put a lid on and take it with you to go. And those cups happen to be compostable, which is very cool. They appreciate services that aren't just on Sunday mornings in a church building.
Yeah.
So we have had church in a diner and church in a pub, and that would be right up the alley of a singles and starter person.
Yeah. Then when it comes to like their worship preferences, these folks tend to be less interested in programmatic worship services and more interested in like getting coaching on disciplines like mediation and advocacy and mutual support. And then when there is a worship service, they tend to prefer one that's more like a TED Talk, that's a little bit more informal, topical, conversational. That's not necessarily why we set up our services this way, but that is sort of how we roll.
It's cool because actually we originally started doing chat questions at church in a diner. And then we were like, this really works for our community and for the DNA of Sycamore Creek. And that's when we started to implement it in Sunday morning services.
I love it. It's so fun. It's so fun to have those chat questions and just have a chance to reflect. The outreach preferences of this group are also really interesting to me. The chart that I saw was like broken down into what they prefer or what they need versus what they want to get involved in. And the group is ready to volunteer to get involved with things like survival needs, health and wellness, quality of life. They don't have those personal needs, but they like to volunteer in that. And that reminds me of where Pastor Tom, like I've heard him reflect on some of why we have partnered with Mount Hope STEAM School. Now, part of it is because they're here and we want to support them.
Yeah.
But we've noticed that like it's not necessarily the families or the teachers from Mount Hope STEAM School that then get involved at Sycamore Creek. It's more that people who appreciate that we volunteer there are drawn to Sycamore Creek. So it's not the people who have the personal needs, but it's the people who want to volunteer to meet those needs who come.
Yeah, and these people do have needs for interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
That's why they end up becoming involved in communities, because they're seeking a place to belong outside of work, or even a place to belong as a family. My kids always say they want to come to church because this is where their friends are.
We see that all the time in the people who stick around at Sycamore Creek. They're looking for that connection. And then in our buildings, like singles and starters tend to be drawn towards spaces that are more effective than traditional. These are spaces where like our buildings have been remodeled with that in mind. This cafe space was remodeled with connection in mind.
There used to be offices here.
Yeah, this used to be office space and now it's a cafe. It's a place to like gather and meet. So we removed the pews from our sanctuary and they're here. You're sitting on one.
Yeah.
We turned it into like a bar for the coffee, the hospitality. And so we took those elements and reused them, which is caring for the environment, but also providing the space to gather and connect.
And it's creative.
And we also share our buildings with Peppermint Creek and Ixion, and Eastwood does this in some other ways, but like it's all over our DNA, how we're using our buildings.
Yeah.
So let's pause here for one last chat question. Where have you noticed us reaching out to singles and starters at Sycamore Creek? Take a minute and talk about it. So much of what we've been talking about today, the ways that Sycamore Creek is already designed to reach singles and starters, right? And a lot of these decisions were made before I came here. Like I said, I've been here for about 2 years. And so it's exciting to me to connect those dots of like, oh, this is why this is the way it is. This was like made with an intentional choice to reach this group of people. And it's not only like giving me new insight, but it's also exciting. And it makes me proud to be part of this community.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of the key verses that you had mentioned earlier in Jeremiah, where he talked about working for the peace and prosperity of the city. These are all ways that we're working for the peace and prosperity of singles and starters.
And so much of what we've talked about today has been a reflection on how Sycamore Creek as a church, like as an organization, has made steps to reach singles and starters. But what are some ways that you think the average person here could reach this group?
Yeah. So I think that first you consider, who do you already know who fit into this group of singles and starters? Mm-hmm. And then you think about the things we talked about today. You could invite somebody who's a single or starter, or I guess I don't know how to say that. You invite them to do a service project with us here at Sycamore Creek. Or maybe you invite them to come to one of our pub events. Like we said, that's a place that people feel comfortable. They've gone to a pub before, so they are familiar with that atmosphere. Invite them to come to one of those events. They're perfect for all kinds of people.
Yeah. It makes me think about what we were talking about at the beginning with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. People are looking for connection and for purpose. And it's sort of like that found family that we started off the message talking about. Church community is a place where people find family and with that connection and purpose.
Yeah. The church that I grew up in, I would say that it definitely felt like family. But when I left that church, I was in my mid-20s, and I was looking for a purpose. I wanted to reach the people of Lansing. And so when I landed at Sycamore Creek, not only did I find a place where I could reach out to the people of Lansing, but I also found a place where I found family.
Yeah, I love that. It sounds like a fairly simple way that any one of us could reach someone in this category of singles and starters. Would be to pick a couple of groups or events from our summer catalog and invite, pick up, or bring them to that group with you.
There's so many opportunities to get involved this summer. One of my favorite things that we do in the summertime is in the month of July, we worship all together, all the campuses at Waldemar Nature Center. And that's one of my favorite things because it's not in the church building. So people who don't necessarily feel comfortable at the church maybe would come with me to it. But I also get to see people from the other campuses. And it kind of feels like a party.
Yeah. There's some other things that we have going on too, like the Pride Festival is coming up in like June 22nd, and like people could volunteer there. Like there's a table that Sycamore Creek will have, but you can also just volunteer or attend. That's a way to get involved and connect with folks. There's walking groups. There's all kinds of groups.
Oh, yeah.
That could be Jesus-y. Like there's a spectrum of very Jesus-y to not very Jesus-y at all. So like you can plug people in where they're ready and where they're comfortable. And I'll just say that there's so much more demographic information available. We really only, like, for as much as this was, it was just the tip of the iceberg.
Yep.
And so if people are nerding out about this, there's opportunity to do that. Like you can go and find all of the data and keep looking at it. But I think our encouragement for today is that we would be the kind of people who are curious about who our neighbors are and curious about who God has called us to reach. We want to be the kind of community that's compassionate to learn our neighbors' needs, who's creative about how to meet our neighbors' needs, and creative about inviting them into the mission of Sycamore Creek. That's our prayer for our community today, for us as individuals and as a community. So we just say, may we be that.
Yeah.
Amen.
Amen.